Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Mr. and Mrs. A here with you after a complete power outage in Stevens County, Washington, which knocked out electricity and phone service to the entire area. It's just been repaired and restored, and so we are now online a little bit late this morning. I hope that you are still with us. I apologize for that technical difficulty. It was unforeseen, and there wasn't a thing we could do about it this morning. Mrs. A and I basically spent the time sitting by the phone, hoping that power would come back on, and wondering how in the world to get in touch with you all, and came up with no ideas, did we?
No cell phones, no nothing.
Let me put before we get started, let me just put a quick announcement in the Google Classroom in case people have had to log off and gone on with their day and are checking in to see what's going on. So hang on one second.
Okay.
Okay,
Let's
Mrs.
get started,
A, let's
shall
go
we?
ahead and get started. I want to share webcams. Make sure you're sharing your webcam, Mrs. A.
I don't know. How do I do that? I don't think so.
Are you logged into the meeting?
Oh, there's my trouble right there. No, that's a staff meeting. That's not right.
Good morning, everyone.
Mr. A, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'll come and set you up. No problem. Now let me know if you can see my face by chatting in the chat box, everyone. Make sure that our video connection is up and running. Very good. Hey, guys. Welcome.
Yeah, not a clue.
Oh, good. It looks like people are talking in Google Classroom this morning. That's pretty great. I love it. Okay, I'm going to help Mrs. A get set up. Hang on one second.
The only thing that's showing up is... Oh, I see. Oh, there we go. Hey. Hi, everybody.
Let's have the cameras up here.
Right. I forgot. Mrs. A doing technology, kind of.
You know what let's do?
What? Well, let's do.
Let us zoom in on you a little bit.
This has been a pretty exhilarating morning. All right. I think that's good.
Will be when I'm done.
Okay.
Hey, guys. Okay. Welcome. It looks like we've got pretty much full class. That's great news. You guys are very patient. Thank you for hanging in there with us. The technical setup that we've been doing, normally we would do before we even went live with the class. Yeah. So you guys are patient to hang with us through that as well. This is British Lit, and it's the first full session that we have since our introductory session when we laid out the method for discussing literature that we do here at CenterForLit, and that we're going to take you through with every classic book that we have on the list. We're going to start that process today with Shakespeare's great play, King Lear. Now, first of all, I'm assuming that everyone has read the play from beginning to end, and that's going to be our custom every month. We assume that you've done all the reading before we get to class, so that we can then go ahead and do the kinds of Socratic questioning and the kinds of discussion with the classic that we did with a children's story last time around. You'll remember we used the story chart to plot the events of the story. We talked about the underlying conflict that's driving the story forward, the kinds of questions that we need to ask in order to see those things clearly. We're going to do all that stuff exactly the same way that we did with Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge, I believe, was the story we used. And we're going to do all those things the same way with King Lear. We're going to do it the same way again with the next classic on the list and the next one after that, so that by the end of the year, not only will you have encountered all of those classic books and understand a little bit more about what they're all about, but you will have acquired a technique for reading good books that you can then use in your own reading for the rest of your career to understand literature well. So we're hoping to go for two goals in our class. So, having said that, let's go ahead and get started with King Lear itself.
Let's do. That's
Mrs.
my favorite part.
How would you begin? And by the way, people are asking how long class is going to go today. We feel an obligation to make sure that your schedule is protected. We're going to try and end the class at the normal ending time. Mrs. A has trouble with that usually,
well,
especially if we start late.
One of the kids saying that we probably will go over realistically, and if we do, there will be a high quality recording available to any of you that have to leave.
Right, and so Mrs. A is always going to go over. I'm always going to try and end on time, so we're going to have to, we'll fight that out over the course of the next 90 minutes. Between the two of us, we will give you your money's worth. So Mrs. A, how would you begin a discussion of Shakespeare's King Lear?
I would like to start with some details of setting, some place issues. So why don't we start there?
Okay, very good. Why don't you begin, Mrs. A, while I get that document up?
Okay, well, let's just ask the kids, where in the world does this story occur? In what time period? All that sort of thing. You know the drill. Where does this take place? Okay, in England. Good. In Albion. Good. Good. What does that tell you about the time period in which the story is set? The use of the word Albion. Ryan says probably in the thousands. Yeah, it's in essentially ancient England, ancient Britain, kind of a pre-Christian England. So we're talking about the time of the legends of Merlin, for example. What is the atmosphere like in this time period in Britain? What's the atmosphere like in this particular play?
And by the way, hands are great if you guys want to raise your hands. Eli says
it's Arthurian England. It would even be a little before that, I think, because, for example, when we read about King Arthur and the knights and all of that sort of thing, there's a particular kind of atmosphere that goes along with that. Camelot was a really sunny kind of a place in general. But what about this place? Elijah says there's a lot of lust for power. That's absolutely true. Rebecca says it's dark and gloomy. Yeah, what makes it so? There's high tension, David says. Yes, high tension. Absolutely. What creates that darkness? What creates the tension? Clarissa says the storm. Yeah, there's a really stormy scene in Act 3. Yeah. Michaelan says, this is a kingdom that is heading downhill because of the king. Yes, that's absolutely true. Anna says it's because the king doesn't care very much besides himself. Okay, he's a very selfish king. Good. All of these are great comments, and they do affect the atmosphere in the story itself. Hannah, you can either chat in the chat box, in the question box to us, or you can raise your hand if you'd like and speak aloud.
Questions that you type in the chat box, like the one you just typed, will be read aloud by Mrs. A and me most of the time.
Ryan says, the diction used by the characters really builds the mood. What do you mean, Ryan? Can you be specific? I think probably the best comments so far have been talking about, the ones that have talked about the lust for power, really creating the atmosphere, establishing the mood in the story. Power is like the singular thing here on the table.
Maya says there's a threat of invasion from France.
Good.
Overlying this story.
There is.
Very true.
There is. And even before the situation with Cordelia and her attempt to come back and right everything that's wrong in her father's country, there's the suggestion that there might not be complete peace between Albion and the other countries, all the other powers that be. Why is that? Where might you see that? Are there elements of foreshadowing that tell you that? Things about the circumstances at the beginning of the play that might indicate that? What are the circumstances at the beginning of the play? Reagan and Goneril are first against Cordelia and then against one another. That's true. But even before that, what is the situation at the beginning of the play? Tom says, Lear is relinquishing his power between his three daughters. Okay, he's wanting to divvy up his kingdom. That's absolutely true. Who is Lear? He's the king in Albion, and he's elderly, and he's ready to divide up his kingdom among his daughters, essentially to retire, right? Let's take a look at the actual text and see what he says here. Excuse me.
Mrs. A is going for her glasses.
No, I gotta have my glasses. This is small. Okay, he says, this is Act 1, Scene 1. Oh, it's probably about 35, line 35. Meantime, we shall express our darker purpose. Give me the map there. Know that we have divided in three our kingdom, and 'tis our fast intent to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths, while we, unburthened, crawl toward death. So there it is. He's basically, in a nutshell, saying he wants to retire, and he wants to divide the kingdom up between his three daughters and their husbands for the purpose of shaking all cares and business from our age. What does that mean?
What does that mean, you guys?
What does that mean?
David says retiring, passing the torch. Clarissa says he wants to party without responsibility.
Yeah.
Tom, living
that's
carefree.
Exactly right. He wants to live a carefree life and give that responsibility to somebody younger. Good. Good. So that gives us a little insight into Lear's desires. Yeah? Okay, there's already been a comment about whether or not Lear might be showing signs of senility. And a lot of people Y'all know where we are. This takes place within a court, right, with courtiers, so king and his court and all of that.
Right.
Okay. Tell me, in terms of this this question, in the company of what kind of people is the story set? What are these people like?
You mean like what kinds of folks, or what their personality is? Hannah says easily angered.
Okay.
McKaylin says power hungry. Jessica greedy and backstabbing.
Okay, selfish. Good. Some of them are untrustworthy. Are they all untrustworthy?
Well, not all of them.
No. No, Clarissa makes a note. Kent is honorable. Good. Ryan, I like your comment. Ryan says King Lear doesn't really know himself too well, and he doesn't like to confront issues in his relationships. Yes, that's a very insightful
I think that's
comment.
insightful, yeah.
And Ryan notices too that Cordelia is very honest. Yes, Cordelia is very honest. Okay, well, let's turn from this particular issue of setting. Oh, there's one more issue of setting that I think we should note in our notes themselves. We've already mentioned it, but we didn't make much of it. This play happens in Lear's old age.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right, so let's make sure we make a note of that. Okay, anything else that we need to discuss about setting before we move on to characters? We're kind of moving into characters anyway. So talk to me about King Lear. We've made the note that he doesn't know himself very well. We've noticed that he's elderly, that he's interested in retiring.
Mm-hmm.
What else? What else is significant about Lear?
Interested in retiring.
Benjamin says he's not very wise. Why do you say that? I agree with you, but why is that? How do you know that? Does he do things that are unwise?
David says he has a short temper.
He does have a short temper. How is that evidenced in the play?
Darby, your hand is up. Sorry for missing that. Darby, go ahead. You have the floor.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, in that not being very wise, he's not a super good judge of character either. Kent tells him honestly his opinion that sharing the splitting the kingdom up isn't a great idea, and Lear banishes Kent for that. And then also he unwisely gives his kingdom to his not well-meaning daughters and sends Cordelia away, the only daughter who does really love him.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little more. I think that's an important part of the play. It gets everything off the ground. In the process of dividing up his kingdom, something occurs and everything goes south. What is that thing? What happens? What is this issue that Kent advises him against?
Clarissa, your hand is up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had something in mind, but my book is in the other room. I'm so sorry.
No,
that's okay.
Go grab it and come on back. Put your hand back up.
How does Lear propose to divide his kingdom?
We've got some hands up. Hannah, your hand is up. Let me unmute you. Mrs. A is asking about the issue of the dividing of the kingdom. Go ahead.
Well, obviously he was going to divide it between his three daughters. What I was going to say concerning that, when we were talking about how King Lear is not a great judge of character, how he was more concerned with which of his daughters said that they loved him more, not exactly who actually loves him. And he made a huge mistake in sending Cordelia away simply because she was honest enough to say that, you know, I love you, but I can't say it. I can't put it into words.
Yeah, and I can't heave those words into my mouth, she says.
Yeah,
right?
and
I can't heave my love into my mouth.
And it was a big mistake to send her away and instead divide it between the daughters who just wanted his possessions and his wealth and did not care about him.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good.
So the situation here is that Lear says, okay, I'm going to divide my kingdom into 3 parts, give it to my 3 daughters, but this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to give them in proportion to their flattery of me. Whoever flatters me the most gets the largest chunk of the kingdom. It'll be like a game. Won't this be great? And Cordelia listens as her 2 sisters, Regan and Goneril, they get to go first, do their very best to outflatter their father. One outflatters the other. But when it's Cordelia's turn, and her father says, let's see, what can you say to draw a third more opulent than your sisters? Speak. She responds, nothing, my lord. And her father says, nothing? And she says, nothing. He says, nothing will come of nothing. Speak again. And Cordelia replies, unhappy that I am, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth. I love your majesty according to my bond, not more nor less. What does that mean, according to my bond? What's a bond? Michaelin, your hand is up.
Let's see, as a bond. Well, it could be as father and daughter. So this is a very strong bond between, it's a family bond. It's one that she is born into, not.
Yes, it's a bond of duty, right? It's a relationship. I love you according to my relationship, which he reads immediately to mean, I don't love you very much. But that's not necessarily what she means at all. She just refuses to play this game, right? And what is his response to her?
He doesn't think that she loves him.
Does he really not think she loves him? Is he angry because she doesn't love him?
Maybe it's because he doesn't think she wants the kingdom as much, or this part was confusing me a little bit.
Yeah, what does he do? I mean, he flies off the handle at her. She says to him, good, my lord, you have begot me, bred me, loved me. I return those duties back as our right fit, obey you, love you, and most honor you. She doesn't say I don't love you. She tells him, I obey you, I love you, and I honor you. Why have my sisters husbands if they say they love you all? Haply when I shall wed, that lord whose hand must take my plight shall carry half my love with him, half my care and duty. Sure, I shall never marry like my sisters to love my father all. What does she mean by that? Basically what she's saying is, I'm going to tell the truth, right?
Yeah. She's going to, instead of getting married, she wants to pledge her life to her father and live for him instead of.
Well, let's look at that again. Is that what she means? She's just noticed that her sisters, when they speak, say they love their father and they don't love anybody else in the world but him, except they're married. So what does that say about their marriages?
They have to be somewhat, they have to be more accountable to their husbands rather than their father.
Though. That's not what they say. What do they say? Listen to what they say. Let's look back. Let's see. Goneril says, Sir, I love you more than words can wield the matter. Dearer than eyesight. Well, that's interesting. The first of the eye images here. Dearer than eyesight, space, and liberty, beyond what can be valued, rich or rare, no less than life, with grace, health, beauty, honor, as much as child e'er loved or father found. A love that makes breath poor and speech unable, beyond all manner of so much, I love you. Wow. She's really pulling out all the stops there. That's Goneril. What about Regan? She says, Sir, I am made of the self-same metal that my sister is, which, as we discover as the story goes on, is certainly true, maybe not that good of a thing for Lear or for her. It's very ironic. And prize me, she says, at her worth. Another ironic statement. In my true heart, I find she names my very deed of love, only she comes too short. That I profess myself an enemy to all other joys, which the most precious square of sense possesses, and find I am alone felicitate in your dear highness's love. Basically, they both say, we love you more than anything else in the whole wide world. Now, if I was either one of their husbands, I would think, hey, wait just a minute. What about me? Didn't you pledge your life to me, your honor to me, your devotion to me, and now you're telling me that you don't love anybody but your father? Well, first of all, do you believe them? What do you think? Do you believe them?
Michaela, you're still on
No.
if you want to be.
No, no. They're being pompous. They're full of hot air. They're flattering him. Why do you usually flatter someone?
To get something in return.
Yeah, yeah. They're flattering him. They're playing his game and manipulating him so that they can get what they want. What do they want?
They want the kingdom, the biggest chunk that they can get.
They do. And how do you know that? When do you discover that?
You discover that kind of when they're playing on. Also later in the play, they say different things like, they at one point, I can't remember if it was Goneril or Regan, but they said they didn't even love their husband. They wanted Edgar because he had more power.
Yeah.
Yeah, they show their colors, their true colors as the play goes on. But even before you get to the end of this scene, after Lear has banished Cordelia, his honest daughter, in his rashness, the two are left alone in the room together. And listen to this. This is the tail end of scene 1. Says, "Sister, it is not a little I have to say of what most nearly appertains to us both. I think our father will hence tonight." And Regan says, "That's most certain. And with you." Read, "Not with me.
He's not coming to my house.
Next month with us. We'll take him next."
Right.
You see how full of changes his age is. The observation we've made of it hath not been little. He always loved our sister most, and with what poor judgment he hath now cast her off appears too grossly. So they notice there have been some changes in their dad, but maybe they're not such changes after all. Because look, they tell you he has always loved Cordelia the most. And now he's behaving really rashly and he's cast her off. And they admit that's very poor judgment. And Regan says, he's basically senile. 'Tis the infirmity of his age. Yet he hath ever but slenderly known himself. What does that mean? He hath ever but slenderly known himself. It gets back to some of the comments in the chat box early in class, this idea that Lear doesn't know himself very well. Ryan, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Hang on, Ryan. I'm trying to unmute you. Oh, Ryan, you're muted on your own side. Click your microphone icon. There you go. Go ahead, Ryan.
Okay. So with he knows himself but slenderly, is that he obviously, unlike somebody who would be really, it's not like Cordelia knows that she's not good with words and she admits it. He doesn't want to admit that he could be in the wrong. You know, like when Ken is confronting him, he doesn't want to admit that he has a short temper, that he has a poor sense of judgment, or he doesn't even want to admit things he said in the past. For example, like later on in the play when he gets rejected by both Regan and Goneril, how he doesn't want to admit that that was part of the agreement, and then he wasn't following it.
That line, that famous line later on, "In all this I am more sinned against than sinning."
Yeah, he's a blame shifter of the first order.
Right.
It's everybody else's fault and not his.
Yeah.
He doesn't see himself. What does it mean to see yourself?
Go ahead, Ryan.
I'd say that to see yourself would be to be able to look at yourself through another set of eyes. So just see your fault, not only your strengths but also your weaknesses, and how they affect the way you act.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. And his daughters note this right from the beginning here at the end of Act 1, Scene 1. Goneril responds, "The best and soundest of his time hath been but rash. Then we must look to receive from his age not alone the imperfections of long ingrate condition." It's just basically, he's always been rash. And so as he gets older, we shouldn't expect anything different than this. But therewithal, the unruly waywardness that infirm and choleric years bring with them, which isn't necessarily senility. It's just that you get older, and as you get sick, you get kind of short-tempered. And so all of the things that he's always been are going to be writ large in his life now. So Regan says, "Such unconstant starts are we like to have from him as this of Kent's banishment." Yeah, not only has he banished his favorite daughter, but he's banished his beloved advisor, his honest friend. Goneril says there is further compliment of leave-taking between France and him. So he's also seeming to muddy the waters in foreign relations here. Pray you, let's hit together. What does she mean by that? Let's hit together. Goneril speaking to Regan.
Hit together means let's cook up a plan.
Yeah. And in particular, this word hit, join forces. Let's work together. And it's got, because of the way that Shakespeare phrases it, his syntax, a hit is, it's aimed, it's calculated, and it's violent, right?
Yeah, right.
This is a very significant word that he chooses here, and it entails all of those things that we've just said. If our father carry authority with such disposition as he bears, this last surrender of his will but offend us. If he carries authority with this kind of a disposition, then this last surrender of his, what last surrender of his?
Giving up his kingdom.
It's going to do nothing but offend us. That is, if he retains authority, but basically gets rid of responsibility, then we'll carry all the weight of responsibility and we'll still be at his beck and call, right? It will offend us. Regan says, we shall further think on it. And Goneril says, we must do something. And in the heat, like right now. So we can see that they're very shrewd, these two sisters. And we've learned a lot about their father from them. They've lived with him all these years. They know him better than he knows himself, turns out. And they tell us that he doesn't know himself. He doesn't see himself, that he's always been rash. And we agree with him by this point because we watched him deal with his beloved daughter Cordelia. And what does he do to her? Well, he flies off the handle because she won't, as she says it, heave her heart into her mouth. She confesses that she loves him, but she will not flatter him, right? Mm-hmm. And the result is he disowns her. He calls her his sometime daughter. Here I disclaim all my paternal care, propinquity, and property of blood, and as a stranger to my heart and me, hold thee from this forever. Wow, that is rash. Now, in the meanwhile, we get Lear entering the scene and basically begging, I'm sorry, not Lear, Kent entering the scene and basically begging Lear not to do this thing. And he speaks out. He says, Royal Lear, whom I have ever honored as my king, loved as my father, as my master followed, and as my great patron thought on in my prayers, let it fall rather though the fork invade the region of my heart. Be Kent unmannerly when Lear is mad. You are acting like a crazy guy, he says. What wilt thou do, old man? He's being very direct. Think'st thou that duty shall have dread to speak when power to flattery vows? To plainness honor is bound when majesty stoops to folly. You're a king, but you're stooping to be a fool. And so I have to speak plainly with you. Reverse thy doom, and in thy best consideration check this hideous rashness. Mm-hmm. Answer my life, my judgment. Thy youngest daughter does not love thee least, nor are those empty-hearted whose low sound reverbs no hollowness. Ah, she's not hollow. That's interesting, right? It's a little metaphor he gives us here.
And he slights Regan and Goneril.
Yeah. Kent, on thy life no more. He says, you shut up, or I'll have your life for this. And Kent says, my life I never held, but as a pawn to wage against thy enemies. You know, Lear, that my life has always been at your command. Nor do I fear to lose it, thy safety being the motive. I'm willing to die, to sacrifice myself for your safety. Still, Lear says, out of my sight. Ooh, there it is again, that word sight. Out of my sight. Essentially, as one of the students noticed earlier, he does not want to see.
Right.
And Kent responds, see better, Lear, and let me still remain the true blank of thine eye.
I'll help you.
I'll help you. See better. Now this exhortation from Kent kind of echoes throughout the course of the entire play. And I would posit that this play is about a king who doesn't see, but who comes to see, at least dimly, the image of himself.
Mm.
This is a play about learning to see yourself.
Clarissa, your hand went up as Mrs. A was talking about that image of seeing. Do you have a comment?
It was reminding me of oh goodness, my mom made an analogy the other day into something I was writing, and it was Something about hollowness I was actually raising my hand about. It was
Okay.
the two daughters are yes man. Cordelia is not. The daughters will say yes, 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 gimme, gimme. And
Yes.
Cordelia is like, I want what's best for you. Do you not see that?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, that's exactly right. Very good.
Maya, you had your hand up as well. Go ahead.
So this is about like the thing of sight that you're saying.
Mhm.
You know what's super interesting? So as King, like this is later in the play, but as he goes mad, he doesn't realize that like Kent is in his service at all because Kent disguises himself to go back into his service.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually, what King Lear says there about like not wanting to see Kent ever again is true. Only he does see Kent, he just doesn't realize it's Kent at
That's
all.
interesting.
Yeah,
Like,
he's
not
blind
even-
to that
not
too.
even- Not even till the end of the play. Like even at the end of the play, he like calls like, "Where's my other servant, dude?" And Kent's like, "I was that servant." And then King Lear's by this time so crazy he doesn't realize it.
Yeah, do you remember what he says there? His response is, "Oh, maybe it is you. Mine eyes are not the best.
I tell you straight.
I tell you straight, mine eyes are not the best."
Yeah.
Best. Like I'm not sure. But
yeah, you know, and it's interesting. A lot of people read that only literally. Like, you know, that he's just, you know, saying, I
Old
don't
and
see
blind.
well, I'm old and blind, or I'm a little senile, or whatever. And I think they miss so much by reading it only at a literal level. Because figuratively speaking, there's a lot loaded into that comment. For example, that he's just at that point in the play, at the very end of the play, at the very end of his life, coming to realize that he doesn't see well. That is, he doesn't perceive things very well. He's not very good at looking at plain truth and understanding it. And this is not because he's mad. This is because he's always been blind as a bat and rash. Okay, good.
Yeah,
that's very good.
Good comment, Maya.
Okay, so we've got the scene set here. We've kind of figured out what's going on. Let's see what comes of it. And we've already mentioned, if Lear is our main character, and we've talked about what is it that he wants. He wants to divest himself of all of his ability, but retain authority. He wants his daughters to do the work of governing the kingdom, and he wants to enjoy the privilege of being the king, but retired. Right? He wants to keep a retinue of soldiers at his command. So really, it retain all the authority, but none of the responsibility. By the way, is that reasonable? Is that possible? Can you divide authority and responsibility that way? What do you think, Clarissa?
Go ahead, Clarissa.
I think I should quote a passage from Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. You cannot have one without the other.
No, you can't really separate
As
those
Uncle
things.
Ben was fond of saying.
Power and responsibility go together, hand in hand, and so he wants something that just simply cannot be.
Carly, what about you?
Basically just that you can't have both of them at the same time.
Right.
Okay, good.
Sense.
Yes.
Yeah, it makes no
It
sense.
doesn't make sense.
Exactly right.
Okay, before we go on and discover what happens in this situation between Lear and his daughters, we need to notice a couple of other characters. At the very beginning of Act 1, Scene 1, we meet some other people that become very significant in the course of the play. Who are they?
Other significant characters. We've got Lear himself, Regan and Goneril, Cordelia. Who else should we mention? Carly, go ahead. I put your hand down a second ago, too soon.
There's Edmund and his brother.
There's Edgar and his brother, Edmund. Good. Which one's which? Do you remember? It's hard to remember, isn't it? Edgar is the honest son of Gloucester. And Edmund is the bastard son of Gloucester.
So then throughout the whole play, Edmund's just everything.
Say it again a little bit louder, Carly.
Throughout the whole play, Edmund just kind of manipulates everybody from the background.
Yes, he does. Edmund, I think it's very interesting. He's very much like Regan and Goneril, isn't he?
Yeah.
What is he after? What does he want?
Power, or his father's
Power. Yeah, you're right. He wants power. Why? Why does he want power? Just for power's sake?
I think it's mainly because
bastard son and doesn't want to be considered that, I guess.
Yeah, what's his attitude about his situation? We learn his situation right off the bat as soon as we open the play. Listen to this. Kent and Gloucester are speaking, and Gloucester says, let's see, "Sir, this young fellow's," listen to it, "is this not your son?" This is Kent. "Is this not your son, my lord?" And Gloucester says, "His breeding, sir, hath been at my charge." And they go on to basically joke about how Edmund was conceived. That is, they essentially spend some time joking in his presence about the fact that he's a bastard son instead of a son born within the bonds of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't really get to see in this particular scene how Edmund responds to all of this banter. What do you suppose is going on stage in his mind, in his heart, in his postures as he listens to his father sport, essentially, with Kent about this issue? Listen to him.
Just a second, Hannah's hand is up. Hannah, did you have an answer to that question? How does Edmund seem to respond?
I was going to say that he, one would assume that he is probably bitter about it and not exactly happy and proud that his father's talking about him that way. But what I was going to say earlier about Edmund and Edgar and Gloucester, is that how you pronounce that, Gloucester?
Gloucester,
yes. That's
right. Okay. Is that I thought it was interesting how, in a way, Gloucester was kind of like Lear, because both of them don't really know which of their children to trust, and they end up trusting the wrong ones. Lear trusts Goneril and Regan, and Gloucester trusts Edmund, and they end up losing the children that would have done them good.
Yes.
So I just thought that was interesting how they were a lot alike in that respect.
Yeah, would you call Gloucester a foil for King Lear?
Yeah.
He is, isn't he? Mm-hmm. And that's true throughout the course of the play. You're right to notice that they're so similar. Neither one of them can see very well, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And let's just keep with this side image, because as we read along and we see what occurs with Gloucester, what happens to Gloucester, this blind father who is ignorant enough and unfeeling enough to make light of the fact that his son is a bastard and to make jokes about it in his presence? I mean, the insensitivity is rich, right?
Yeah. Well, eventually he becomes physically blind, and I think that is definitely part of what's the word I'm looking for? It basically is his he gets his due, I guess, in a way, that because of his mental or spiritual blindness or whatever, he eventually becomes physically blind to kind of show that in a more
good
physical manner.
Yep. That's exactly right. Yep. And don't you think it's interesting? And obviously Shakespeare did this on purpose. He uses this imagery and chooses that particular blinding scene in order to demonstrate the effects of living with this kind of lack of insight into yourself and to the people around you.
Although Anna has an interesting point. She says he loses his sight but gains vision.
Yes, he does. I was just going to say, what is the effect of the blinding of Gloucester midway through the play? He gains self-sight. He says, I stumbled when I saw. Now I see. I stumbled when I saw. That is, when I had my eyes, I stumbled.
Right.
That is, I fell. I couldn't see anything. But now that I'm blind, I see. It's kind of interesting, the irony in that statement. It's a paradox.
The question of what does it mean to see? What is the actual word sight? What do eyes actually mean?
Shakespeare's playing with this whole idea.
Right.
He's playing with this idea of blindness to self. And it's actually through the physical suffering of blindness that Gloucester sees that he has had it all wrong, that he's done everything wrong. So if this whole play is going to be about this issue of self-sight, and if Shakespeare really is intentionally setting up a foil relationship between Lear and Gloucester, we're going to have to watch these two stories develop. And if a foil is designed to basically show the attributes of one by contrast with the other, we're going to have to see where these two that have so much in common diverge. Where do they diverge? Are their stories identical? Or does the story of the one essentially show us problems with the other in one way or another. Because at the beginning, there's not a dime's worth of difference between them except their station. They're both in the court. They're both living lives of privilege in one way or another, and they're both blind to themselves and their children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Let's notice Edmund's response to Gloucester's words. Let's finish Gloucester's words here. But I do have a son, sir, a son by order of law, some year elder than this, who yet is no dearer in my account. Though this knave came something saucily into the world before he was sent for, yet was his mother fair. There was good sport at his making, and the whoreson must be acknowledged. I guess I have to own him. Isn't that something?
Mm.
Okay, so on we go here, moving on into scene 2. And the very first thing that happens in scene 2 is we get Edmund's response, a little insight into Edmund. We get this little soliloquy. He's alone on the stage with a letter. And he says this, "Thou, nature, art my goddess. To thy law my services are bound. Wherefore should I stand in the plague of custom and permit the curiosity of nations to deprive me, for that I am some 12 or 14 moonshines lag of a brother? Why, bastard? Wherefore base? When my dimensions are as well compact, my mind is generous, and my shape as true as honest madam's issue. Why brand they us with baseness, bastardy, base? Who in the lusty stealth of nature take more composition and fierce quality than doth within a dull, stale, tired bed go to the creating of a whole tribe of fops, go tween asleep and wake? Well then, legitimate Edgar, I must have your land. Our father's love is to the bastard Edmund as to the legitimate. Fine word, legitimate. Well, my legitimate, if this letter speed and my invention thrive, Edmund the base shall top the legitimate. I grow, I prosper. Now, gods, stand up for bastards." So we see that what you've already acknowledged about his bitterness at his father's treatment, and not just his father's, but society's treatment of bastards, that is, illegitimate sons, is something that's made him very, very angry.
Bitter, I think Hannah mentioned a minute ago.
Very bitter. And he is moved to do something about this. What is the something? What is this letter that he's holding in his hand? He says, if this letter speed and my invention thrive. What is he plotting here with this letter?
Oh, we got hands. Sarah, haven't heard from... Oh, Sarah, your hand was up, but now it's down. It's back. Sarah, go ahead.
So he succeeds in convincing Gloucester that Edgar wants to kill him, and then...
Yes.
So then Gloucester thinks that Edmund is actually a good son, and he loves him more than Edgar now.
Right.
Mm-hmm. He does.
So, let's see. We'll put that in rising action, Mrs. A, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, Edmund, he says, he tells Edgar to go away because he convinces Edgar that his father's got it in for him. So he gets Edgar, the honest son, out of the way. And Edmund says, "A credulous father and a brother noble whose nature is so far from doing harms that he suspects none." He's pretty easily duped.
Yeah.
He's so good that he doesn't ever suspect anyone of being anything other than good themselves. On whose foolish honesty my practices ride easy. He's so honest he'll never, ever think that I am scheming the things I scheme.
Mm-hmm.
I see the business. Let me, if not by birth, have lands by wit. All with me is meet that I can fashion fit.
Ryan texted that to us a minute ago.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, okay. So he is in it to take his father's land wrongly from his brother.
Yep.
Just through shrewdness and manipulation. And he is taking advantage of their believability, their gullibility, and their love towards him, essentially, in order to dupe them.
Clarissa, hand up. Go ahead.
I was going to say two things. Really, one was in regards to, I always read it as Gloucester. His blindness, I would say that your sight influences everything you do, what you touch, what you eat, everything. But when you are blind, you are forced to think about a person's tone and their intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the second thing is about what's his name? Edmund's illegitimacy. I think he's bitter because he can't help it that he's illegitimate, and everyone's
Right.
judging him because he was just born.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the same thing about Goneril and Reagan, who, we see them as these cold-hearted snakes, and certainly they behave that way. But why are they that way? Did they just come out of the womb like that?
Isn't it that Lear has treated them for their whole lives the same way he's treating them now?
I would say so. I mean, the results of
Anna says
child
they
rearing
haven't
are
had
clear.
the best father.
No, they haven't had the best father. As a matter of fact, I would go so far as to say they're modeling.
Yeah,
They're
Clarissa
essentially
says
just modeling what they've seen.
Lear loves Cordelia more, as we learn in Act 1.
Yes.
Right?
They're playing the games that they learned from him to play.
Yeah.
Same thing with Edmund.
Right. The idea of the foil that you mentioned a minute ago, Mrs. A, is really important in this play.
It is.
In
There are
fact,
foils everywhere.
When you notice, is two characters that are set up side by side whose similarities and differences allow the reader to see a theme being emphasized. When you notice that there is a foil going on, suddenly you notice pairings and couplings of foils throughout the play. They're under every rock, really.
Mm-hmm.
Gloucester and Lear, Edmund and Regan and Goneril, Edgar and Cordelia, Kent and Cordelia. I mean, the pairings
they go
crop
on and
up
on.
everywhere.
It's really true. Okay, so we kind of know where we are. We've got Lear, who wants power. He wants flattery. He wants ease. He wants to be petted and praised in the midst of his senior years. And to prevent war, he says he's dividing up the kingdom in order to prevent a war at the time of his death, an easy transfer of power, a united kingdom. He wants to be the center of his and everybody else's universe. And
Right.
Gloucester wants to put Edmund out of sight, to remain honored, to live unanswerable to anyone. Basically, to be like a god. They both want to live like gods. Okay, what are the obstacles that they face in achieving these aims, the two of them, if we consider them of a piece? And for the sake of the foil relationship, let's do. What are the obstacles to Lear? Well, first and foremost, he mistakes flattery for love. What else stands in his way of achieving all of these objects that we've just noted?
Maya, what stands in the character's way? Gloucester and Lear in particular. What are the obstacles they face?
Well, they don't have self-sight, so they
Right.
can't. That's a big obstacle for them.
A huge obstacle. So that'd be like a man versus self conflict, right?
Yes, and the other thing I was thinking about is that the one thing about that's different between Cordelia and Edgar is that Edgar doesn't suspect Edmund when he enacts his plot. Cordelia totally sees through her sister's plan.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's
that's a
probably
good
fair.
point.
Cordelia's a bit more like she's not as naive as Edgar is, because
No.
Edgar totally goes along with the whole plot, like falls into the whole plot thing super easily, whereas Cordelia knows that Goneril and Reagan are up to no good.
Yes. She says that at the end of Act 1, Scene 1, the jewels of our father with washed eyes Cordelia leaves you. I know you what you are, and like a sister am most loath to call your faults as they are named. Use well our father. To your professed bosoms I commit him. But yet, alas, stood I within his grace, I would prefer him to a better place. Ooh, she basically says, I see you and I know what you're about. You're a couple of cold-hearted snakes.
When you're talking about the conflict that's driving this story forward, and by the way, anytime we start asking what's the main character want, what are they after, and what are the obstacles, we're talking about the conflict that we're going to put down at the bottom of our chart here. I heard you sort of suggesting, Mrs. A, that Gloucester and Lear are after a certain set of things self-consciously.
Yes.
They were looking for ease without responsibility.
So man versus man, because their children stand in the way and their deceit is evident, right?
I don't think their lack of self-sight is the obstacle.
Not in that situation.
No, I think we've got this written wrong. I think in a sense, their lack of self-sight is the obstacle to some other goal, some other lack, some other want.
Well, they want to see, right? In order to accomplish any of, for example, the unity of the kingdom, to maintain the unity of the kingdom, what's necessary is a wise king who sees things clearly. and he doesn't.
Right. And also, as we mentioned when we were doing the children's story last time around, what does the character want can be understood as self-consciously desire.
Yes.
Or also lack.
Yes.
What does the character lack? And the ability to see clearly, even for all these other purposes, is certainly a lack in both of them.
Absolutely.
So we could say the man versus himself conflict could be stated: will Gloucester and or Lear see clearly?
Yes.
Despite their blindness.
Absolutely. In fact, I think that is the overwhelming conflict in the story. More so than the physical conflict, the desire to keep a united kingdom, for example, or the issue of conflict within their family and things like that. Those are all underscored by this lack of sight. Those all exist and grow as a result of this lack of sight. This lack of self-knowledge is the most significant problem in Lear and in Gloucester too. His duty is entirely confounded by his desires. He has no ability to stop and watch himself think.
Ryan, your hand is up. We'll take your comment, and then we're going to move on with the rising action, talk about the plot of this story a little bit. But you're muted on your end, so there you go. Go ahead, Ryan.
Okay, so this has to do more with Edgar, but this ties into, like, both Gloucester and Lear not knowing themselves, is that Edmund doesn't know himself either. He's a lot like Lear, actually, in the fact that he's bitter. But one thing that's interesting is just before Edgar enters the scene, he says, "My father compounded with my mother under the dragon's tail, and my nativity was under Ursa Major, so that it follows I am rough and lecherous." And he doesn't realize himself becoming that as throughout the story. He sort of perceives himself.
Mind about it, yes.
He perceives himself as far better than he really is.
I think that's certainly true. I mean, he doesn't see himself any more clearly than Lear or Gloucester. He's definitely right about that.
Let's look at that little passage that you're just referencing here, and let's read it together. Edmund says, "This is the excellent foppery of the world, that when we are sick in fortune, often the surfeit of our own behavior, we make guilty of our disasters the sun, the moon, and the stars, as if we were villains by necessity, fools by heavenly compulsion, knaves, thieves, and treachers by spherical predominance, drunkards, liars, and adulterers by an enforced obedience of planetary influence, and all that we are evil in by a divine thrusting on. An admirable evasion of whoremaster man to lay his goatish disposition to the charge of a star." And he's responding, of course, to words that his father said. "This villain of mine comes under the prediction. There's son against father. The king falls from bias of nature. There's father against child. We have seen the best of our time. Machinations, hollowness, treachery, and all ruinous disorders follow us disquietly to our graves." He's basically talking about the planetary movement, the astrological forces at work. You're born under a certain star. Astrology says then you'll behave a certain way. And they used to make all kinds of predictions in the pagan world on the basis of the movement of the stars in the sky. And so Gloucester is blaming all of these things that are happening that are bad on the movement of the stars. And his son says, "Isn't that funny? Isn't that just like man? We never, ever blame our circumstances on ourselves, but instead we look to pawn them off on whatever else is available. If nothing else, on the movement of the stars. But even more so, we would even blame it on the gods by a divine thrusting on. It's God's fault. It's the planet's fault. It's somebody else's fault, but it's not my fault." Isn't that funny?
Underscoring Gloucester's problem and Lear's problem.
Yeah.
Jessica, your hand is up. Go ahead.
I just kind of wanted to make a point on that, actually. I think the setting with the pagan gods is on purpose, because the pagan gods are really steeped in a core of order out of chaos, which is a running theme throughout the story. So I think the points with the astrology and with the Greek gods are totally on purpose, as it's very lewd and unhinged, and the characters themselves are that way.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great observation.
There is this effort to try and make order out of chaos on the part of the the characters you're rooting for and also of the villains of this piece. I like that observation.
And when the story comes to a kind of climactic moment, when we see, because really, once we've got the conflict in mind, this lack of self-sight, this need for self-sight that's driving Lear, and the circumstances kind of build the plot, and it moves forward to critical mass in Lear's life. His daughters do what they set out to do, which is rob him of his authority as well as his ease, and basically turn him into a child, treat him like a child, take away all of his soldiers, all of his comforts, and basically put him in his place as far as they're concerned. As insult follows insult and his real situation dawns on him, how does he respond? What does he do?
Are we on into discussing plot, Mrs. A, or is this a thematic observation?
Well, it's all kind of bound up together, Mr. A. What does he do? What's his response? And Maya, we'll get to the fool. I'm not leaving the fool out at all.
So Mrs. A, not jumping ahead a ton, but she has compressed in a very short sentence a giant chunk of the plot, which is that Regan and Goneril actually make good on their hitting together a plan.
They do.
And they, step by step, reduce Lear's allowance and finally reduce him to penury and kick him out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And so he is essentially banished, just like he did to Cordelia. And Mrs. A's question is, how does he respond? So somebody answer that question. Where does he go? In what part of the play does this happen? And what is Lear's response to his banishment?
I mean, really, the effects of his rashness, they crop up immediately, don't they?
What do you guys give me? Let me have an answer to that general question. Tom, your hand is up and you're on. Go ahead.
Well, after Lear is banished by Regan and Cordelia, he goes out into the storm and starts screaming at the heavens, basically, and he starts playing on the heavens, just like Gloucester was in the beginning of the story.
Yes.
And then after doing that and being out in the storm, probably catching hypothermia or whatever, he starts going kind of crazy.
He does. He begins to go crazy, and he blames
everybody. I think it's
everybody.
interesting that the two things Tom mentioned are connected, perhaps. I mean, he mentions them as happening at the same time. He rages against the people that had done him wrong. In fact, this is where he says that famous line, "I am more sinned against than sinning," and also goes a little nuts.
He does. He says, "Rumble thy bellyful, spit fire, spout rain, nor rain, wind, thunder, fire are my daughters. I tax not you, you elements, with unkindness. I never gave you kingdom, called you children. You owe me no subscription. Then let fall your horrible pleasure. Here I stand, your slave, a poor, infirm, weak, and despised old man. But yet I call you servile ministers that have with two pernicious daughters joined your high-engendered battles against a head so old and white as this." He blames the elements. It's your fault.
Madison, your hand is up. Jump right in.
Oh, I just thought it was interesting that as he's been rejected by his daughters and he's in such like mental anguish and moral anguish and he can't quite accept what he's kind of done to himself, he says that thou thinkest is much that this contentious storm invades us to the skin, so it is to thee, but where the greater malady is fixed, the lesser is scarce felt. So he's willing to resort to this physical pain to kind of distract him from what's been going on in his life.
Excellent.
Yes, excellent.
Excellent.
Excellent. You're reading it exactly right. Do you guys understand what she's saying? Basically, I would rather subject myself to this terrible rainstorm than subject myself and really contemplate the storm that's brewing in my own head, in my own family, in my own heart. This storm is a welcome distraction that helps me not look at, not see what's becoming evident, like hard to see around, really, for all of us readers. Listen what he says here. He says, "This night wherein the cub-drawn bear would couch, the lion and the belly-pinched wolf keep their fur dry, unbonneted he runs and bids what will take all." This is what the gentlemen say about him. But he says, I'm looking for the one about the bear. Hang on.
This is how Mrs. A always
This is how
does
I
it.
always do it, right? He explains himself. Here it is.
Where are we, Mrs. A?
This is
act and scene.
This is Act 3,
Okay.
Scene 4. They're on the heath, and it's that same section that you were just reading aloud. And let's just look at this a little more completely. He says, "Thou thinkest 'tis much that this contentious storm invades us to the skin. So 'tis to thee. But where the greater malady is fixed, the lesser scarcely felt. Thou wouldst shun a bear, but if thy flight lay toward the raging sea, thou'dst meet the bear in the mouth. When the mind is free, the body's delicate." See, when there's no struggle going on in my mind, then I really feel the things going on outside of me. But
Right.
that's not the situation for him. "The tempest in my mind," he says, "doth from my senses take all feeling else save what beats there." And then he tells you what it is. "Filial ingratitude." My daughter's ungratefulness. "Is it not as this mouth should tear this hand for lifting food to it? But I will punish home. I'll get my revenge. No, I will weep no more. In such a night to shut me out. Pour on, I will endure. In such a night as this, O Regan, Goneril, your kind old father, whose frank heart gave all." What's he doing? He's
Shifting
refusing.
blame.
He's shifting blame, and he's justifying himself.
Refusing to see.
Has he really been a kind old father to them? Frank in his heart? Really? And then what is his response? He breaks off. "Oh, that way madness lies. Let me shun that. No more of that." A very interesting comment. Very interesting. What does he mean by that? That way madness lies. That way, thinking about the filial ingratitude. And by the way, does madness lie that way?
Michaelan, your hand is up. The question of madness here.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, he's talking about we're reading this section where he's basically saying, I'm not worried about the storm. It's a nice distraction, so I don't have to look at the storm that's raging in my mind and heart, this issue of filial ingratitude. And then he begins to blame shift and say, it's all their fault. They've never really appreciated me. I've been kind. I've given them everything. And then he breaks off and he says, that way madness lies. Let me shun that. No more of that. Does madness actually lie that way? That is, what is the source of Lear's madness? Because we see at this point that he goes kind of crazy. Yeah. Not entirely crazy. I mean, there's still words that come out of his mouth that are amazingly insightful. For example, bottom of the next page, when he's looking at poor Tom, right, who's actually Edgar in disguise, laying in the mud, unaccommodated, he makes this comment, unaccommodated man is no more but such a poor, bare, forked animal as thou art. Off, off, you lendings, come unbutton here. It tears his clothes off to clothe poor Tom.
But Mrs. A, you're far afield of the original question.
Well,
about
only a
madness.
little. I say that to say he's not entirely mad. In fact, maybe he's behaving in a way that's more sane than he's behaved all of his years on the throne. He mentions almost in the next breath after this section that we've read about why he doesn't mind the storm when he's raging against his daughters. Almost in the next breath, he says, this would be to the fool. He says, boy, you go into this little hut first, you houseless poverty. Get thee in. I'll pray and then I'll sleep. And the fool goes in, and then he says this, poor naked wretches, wheresoe'er you are, that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed raggedness, defend you from reasons such as these? I have taken too little care of this. Take physic, or medicine, pomp, that is power. Expose yourself to feel what wretches feel, that thou mayest shake the superflux to them and show the heavens more just. That is, it's dawning on him as he experiences being unaccommodated, that is, being subject to the elements, along with this beggar, the condition of many in his kingdom, all of these many years that he's been reigning and enjoying the privilege that he's had as the king. He's never felt this before, but now that he's subject to it himself, he's gaining some empathy. And what is his response? Oh, I see. I should have taken care of this before, but I haven't. So now take your medicine, king. Expose yourself to feel what the poverty-stricken feel, what wretches feel, so you may know how to shake the superflux to them. Superflux is like an excessive flowing. That is, how to be bountiful with them. And in that way, show the heavens to be more just. I've basically been standing in the position of God in their lives. I've had the responsibility of God to show them mercy, to do justly. I've been the king, and I've never taken care of this. This is not the comment of a man who's crazy.
So Michaelan, what does he mean then? That way madness lies.
Oh.
To the extent that Lear is mad, what is making him mad? What is making him crazy? Is it really his daughters make him crazy?
It could also be that he's trying to, let's see. This is really interesting. But,
I think so too.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
What is making Lear crazy? Isn't that the question?
I think, I wonder if, and Michaelan, I don't mean to jump in and interrupt you, but I wonder if one of the implications of what you're saying, Mrs. A, is that he's wrong, actually. That when he says that way madness lies, he's stating something that isn't true. He's afraid that he's going to go crazy if he sees himself, if he embraces his own fault, if he admits that this is on him. Yeah. And he says, if that happens, I'll go crazy. But it's not true. That's actually his only hope of salvation and reconciliation. What do you think of that idea, Michaelan?
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, if he stops thinking about the storm or what's going on other than what he's doing, he thinks he's going to go mad.
Yeah. Mrs. A?
Rebecca says, could it be that he has brought this madness on himself? Yeah, I think it could. I think it could absolutely be. And how has he brought it on himself? Just all those years of being rash and blind? I mean, certainly, yeah. But look, it's continuing, refusal. Right? His refusal to do what? His refusal to take responsibility, right? Yeah,
his refusal to say, as he says almost without knowing it, hey, this is on the king. Yeah. Take your physic, Pomp. This is on me. I should have taken care. This is my fault.
Not just should I have taken care of the poverty in my kingdom and done justly there, but he's also the king of his home.
Yeah.
The king of his family.
Yeah.
And he can't quite make that leap here. This way madness does lie. And what is the way that he's going in when he breaks off here? Is it not blame shifting? That's the way to madness.
Yeah, it's an ironic statement.
It's a very
he's
ironic
actually saying seeing yourself clearly is the way to madness, but instead he is running down the true way to madness, which is refusal to see yourself. Yeah. Elijah, your hand is up, and we haven't heard from you yet. Go ahead.
Okay, I just thought it was interesting how he seems to kind of gain sanity a little bit here, but then I just thought it was really interesting how he then later in the story really seems to kind of go over the edge again. So
you're right. He in one way he seems to gain some sanity. That is, he begins to see.
Hang on, Mrs. A. Before you comment, Elijah, I don't think you were quite done. Go ahead.
Oh, that was it.
Oh, okay. So go ahead, Mrs. A.
Well, in the one way, in this scene, he begins to see, but in another way, he seals his fate where madness is concerned by deciding not to see what's going on with his daughters and the nature of his circumstances and why and what got him there. He refuses to take responsibility, whereas the storm makes him realize his responsibility that he's shirked all these years in his kingdom. The storm becomes a distraction from having to look at the way he's shirked his responsibility in his family these years. He will not take responsibility for his circumstances in this particular situation, and it's the beginning of the end for him where madness is concerned. Somebody mentioned the fool a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
What's the fool's role in all of this?
Let's see.
Look at Act 1, Scene 4.
Anna, your hand is up. Tell me about the fool.
Well, From what I read and from what I gathered, and this may, of course, just be my opinion on it. It may not actually be what it is, but I kind of feel like the fool uses his little stories or songs to kind of impart wisdom to Lear in a way.
Yes.
I don't know. That's kind of what I thought when I was reading the things that he would say. You know, it's kind of, I felt like it was wisdom or at least common sense kind of masked in his frivolousness, if you will.
Yes, that's absolutely
Yeah.
true. He's a wise fool, isn't he? He's sophomoric. Listen what he says. He's speaking to the king. He calls him a fool. Lear says, "Dost thou call me fool, boy?" And the fool responds, "All thy other titles thou hast given away, that thou wast born with." A little later, he says, let's see. And Kent says, "This is not altogether fool, my lord. No, faith, lords and great men will not let me. If I had a monopoly out, they would have part on it. And ladies, too, they will not let me have all fool to myself. They'll be snatching. Give me an uncle, nuncle, or I'm sorry, give me an egg, nuncle, and I'll give thee 2 crowns. And Lear says, "What 2 crowns shall they be?" He says, "Why, after I have cut the egg in the middle and eat up the meat, the 2 crowns of the egg. When thou clovest thy crown in the middle and gavest away both parts, thou borest thy ass on thy back o'er the dirt. Thou hadst little wit in thy bald crown when thou gavest thy golden one away. If I speak like myself in this, let him be whipped that first finds it so." There it is, the wisdom cloaked in this little play on words about the egg and the crown, right? And what is he basically saying? You, king, have made yourself a fool.
Right.
You are responsible for your own circumstances. You've done it to yourself, right? Thou hast paired thy wit on both sides and left nothing in the middle. Here comes one of the pairings, and then comes his daughter. I mean, he's also comic relief, and we need it here because it's a tragedy, the story of King Lear. It's one of Shakespeare's tragedies. So he's a little comic relief, but he's also a guiding force. He's attempting to guide the king from ignorance and arrogant blindness into sanity, sense, and humility.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And he's loyal and true, much like Kent in this particular story, much like Cordelia. Okay, we've noticed Lear's response to the situation. We've noticed how he responds to his circumstances. He says, "No, no, I won't look at myself." What about Gloucester? We decided at the beginning that his circumstances were virtually the same. Both blind to themselves and their children. They both have children who are upset about it and who are manipulating circumstances in order to get some sort of revenge.
So, Tom, what about Gloucester?
Well, it seems like with the idea of the foil, they both are very similar throughout the story, but it seems that the point where they both differ is how they respond to sort of being banished.
Yes.
Like Lear is banished from his household and he's sent out into the storm, and he refuses to take responsibility, and so he goes crazy.
Yes.
Then Gloucester obviously doesn't go crazy when he has his eyesight taken away and he's kind of wandering around in the wilderness. But I think he begins to realize instead the mistakes that he's made, because doesn't he start to wish that Edgar was still there or something like?
He does, doesn't he?
Yeah, good comments, Tom. Mrs. A, I wonder if you could give us a quick summary of how it goes down with Gloucester for the purpose of filling in our rising action bubble just a little bit.
Well, we get Regan and Gloucester. Well, Regan and her husband, Cornwall, show up at Gloucester's castle where King Lear is lodging. And she basically turns her father out in the storm. Her sister shows up there too, and together they do hit together. And they rob him of all of his, all of his honor, in addition to his authority. And he finds himself out there in the rainstorm. Meanwhile, Gloucester feels for him. I mean, anyone would feel for him in this circumstance. And he decides he's going to work to try to better his circumstances. He is essentially in correspondence with Cordelia in France, and he's trying to help her position herself to come and take back the authority of the kingdom in a coup. So he's staging a military assault, right? which would be seen as traitorous, given that Regan and Goneril are the powers that be in Albion at the time. Well, he has received notice that Cordelia and her husband, the King of France, are within the borders again. And he's, the letter is intercepted by Edmund, and Edmund turns it over to Regan and her husband, and they decide to punish Gloucester for aiding the king and for working against them in their power. So they decide to blind him. But in the process, one of the honest servants in Gloucester's house gives the Duke of Cornwall like a mortal wound.
A mortal wound, right.
And he dies. So here, Act 4, we're on a heath, and Edgar, the honest son, says, "Yet better thus than known to be condemned, than still condemned and flattered." Very interesting. The truth is better than flattery, he says. To be worst, the lowest and most dejected thing of fortune, stands still in esperance, lives not in fear. The lamentable change is from the best. The worst returns to laughter. Welcome then, thou unsubstantial air that I embrace. The wretch that thou hast blown into the worst owes nothing to thy blasts. But who comes here? My father, poorly led. World, world, oh world, but that thy strange mutations make us hate thee, life would not yield to age. So we see Gloucester for the first time since the blinding, and an old man is trying to help him, and he says, "Away, get thee away, good friend, be gone. Thy comforts can do me no good at all. Thee they may hurt." And the old man says, "Alack, sir, you cannot see your way." And Gloucester responds, "I have no way, and therefore want no eyes. I stumbled when I saw. Full oft 'tis seen our means secure us, and our mere defects prove our commodities." What does that mean?
Oh man, too often what we have.
Our means secure us, and our mere defects prove our commodities. That is, the blessings in our life do what? Blind us.
Yeah.
But our defects are our benefits.
In other words, he's starting to see.
Yeah, he is. He is starting to see. Now, Edgar, remember, why is he in hiding?
Because he's been wrongly banished.
He's been wrongly banished, not just banished, but his father's put out a warrant for his arrest that would lead to his execution.
Yeah.
He thinks his father is out to kill him, and so he's hiding. And so he's watching this, and he's moved with compassion for his father, but he dare not reveal his identity to him because he doesn't want to be killed.
Yeah.
He doesn't know if his father's actually for him at this point. What in the world is going on? So instead, he decides, still disguised, to come alongside his father and lead him. And this just gets more and more emotional as they go along together, because he realizes that Gloucester's in the pit of despair, that he has actually seen himself, and he's despairing it. He realizes after he's been blinded what the whole situation has actually been. He says, "All dark and comfortless, where's my son Edmund?" And Cornwall and Regan respond. He says, "Where's my son Edmund? Edmund, enkindle all the sparks of nature to quit this horrid act." He's calling on Edmund for help. And Regan says, "Out, treacherous villain, thou callest on him that hates thee. It was he that made the overture of thy treasons to us, who is too good to pity thee." And Gloucester responds, "Oh, my follies. Then Edgar was abused. Kind gods, forgive me that and prosper him." Basically, he says, I have misperceived everything.
You're right.
I've gotten it all wrong, okay? And so he falls into the depths of despondency and despair, and he decides he's going to go and jump off a cliff and end it all. He's going to kill himself because he doesn't deserve to live. He tells Edgar, "There is a cliff whose high and bending head looks fearfully in the confined deep. Bring me but to the very brim of it, and I'll repair the misery thou dost bear with something rich about me. From that place I shall no leading need." We can see his intentions here. They're very dark. He intends suicide, right? And his son understands it too. His son, poor Tom, right? Edgar in disguise. He says, I see what my father's about. Does he allow it? How does Edgar respond to Gloucester's despair? Do you guys know?
Let's see. Oh, couple of hands. Let's go with a hand we have not heard from yet. Caitlin, go ahead.
Let's see. He takes him to what he says is the edge of the cliff, but it's not really.
It's not,
and
is
then
it?
when he doesn't actually kill himself because it's not really the edge of the cliff.
Yeah,
Right.
why does he do that?
Well, because he doesn't want him to kill himself.
Yes. Yes, I'm looking for the passage here. I should have marked it better. He basically wants his father to see that life is good.
Grace says he fakes a divine intervention.
He does, doesn't he? He fakes a divine intervention and basically wants him to believe that the gods have kept him from death because they alone are the authors of life and death.
Mm-hmm.
And that life is a wonder. He says as much. Life is a wonder.
So how is the foil relationship proceeding then, if you look at Lear and Gloucester? To this point, both of them are out on the moor, out in the storm, face to face with how things really stand. Their deceptions that they've been operating under have fallen away. And on the one hand, Lear rages against the heavens and distracts himself by blaming his children, by blaming the fates, by blaming the storm. And Gloucester says, God, forgive me and prosper him.
Mm-hmm.
So we get two completely different paths to resolution.
Let me ask
the two.
a question here that I think is worth asking. Has Lear at this point not noticed that he did wrong? Has he completely avoided recognizing that his banishment of Cordelia was his own fault and a bad thing?
Carly, your hand is up. Go ahead.
This is actually a comment from way earlier question.
Oh, okay. Hang on one second. Let's leave that. We'll come back to you. I want to get an answer to Mrs. A's question. Does Lear know that he's done wrong at this point? Elijah, you're self-muted. Go ahead and click your mic once to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Okay. I think that he is recognized his wrongdoings a little bit because Lear was when he was raging against the elements. No, maybe it was after when he was praying. He was talking about when we were discussing how he was realizing that he was the king of his kingdom and of his family, and he had rejected the responsibility of his kingship, I guess.
Right.
So he is starting to realize that he did wrong, but is still trying to shift blame to others.
Okay.
Look at, this is as early as Act 1, Scene 4. Before Act 3 and the storm. Listen to what he says. He says, "O most small fault, how ugly didst thou in Cordelia show, that like an engine wrenched my frame of nature from the fixed place, drew from my heart all love and added to the gall. O Lear, 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 beat at this gate that let thy folly in and thy dear judgment out," with the side note of striking his head. Right. Go, my people. What is that?
That means he knows.
He knows I did Cordelia wrong.
Right.
Lear, this gate let folly in. That is me, my judgment. My judgment.
My forehead.
My forehead. It's on me, he says. That's as early as Act 1. So it's not true that he doesn't realize that he's pretty much the problem here. It's that he doesn't want to acknowledge it, that he can't act on it.
Can't embrace it.
He can't embrace it.
Like Gloucester does out on the moor.
And so he turns his face away and he becomes
and says, mad. That way madness lies.
Okay.
Ironically.
Okay, so here we are on the moor. Let's see, Gloucester has just been unsuccessful at taking his life, and he has his son explain to him what's happened, and he says, you know, your life's been spared. Your life is a miracle, he says. Your life is a miracle. And then just on the heels, here comes Lear, like a crazy guy running through the fields. Away from whom? Who's he running away from? Did you guys notice? He's running away from gentlemen. Who are these gentlemen?
His attendants, says Elijah.
They're the queen's men. Well, what queen? Not Regan and Goneril's queen, as queen. We're talking Cordelia's men.
Right,
Cordelia's
Brian,
there,
good.
and she is trying to lay hands on her father to save his life, right? Though the queen is on special cause here, her army has moved on. Okay, so they're chasing him to take him back to Cordelia. And he, you can see, in his madness, is coming to knowledge even still. In all of the things that he says, everything he says has a double meaning.
Mm.
He's still blaming things on his two untrue daughters. They flattered me like a dog, he says, and told me I had white hairs in my beard ere the black ones were there. To say A and no to everything that I said, A and no, was no good divinity. When the rain came to wet me once, and the wind to make me chatter, when the thunder would not peace at my bidding, there I found him, there I smelt him out. Go to, they are not men of their words. They told me I was everything. 'Tis a lie. I'm not egg-proof. They told me I was everything. It's a lie. I'm not egg-proof. That's a very significant statement. What is he noticing here? That his daughters flattered him. That is, they lied to him.
Mm-hmm.
He was not everything, not to them. And I think that goes even deeper. He lived his whole life as though he were everything, like a king, like a god.
Yeah.
And he's realizing in his circumstances, through his circumstances, that he's not everything. That's a really important thing to know, don't you think?
Yes.
Very important to know that you're not God. He goes on, everything that he says is infused with more meaning than madness, even though he's running mad. He runs into Gloucester, and he's moved with compassion because Gloucester's lost his eyes. I remember thine eyes well enough. Dost thou squinty at me? No, do thy worst. Blind Cupid, I'll not love. So he begins to exchange words with Gloucester, and Gloucester feels as compassionate for Lear as Lear feels for Gloucester. Why do you think they have such compassion for each other? What causes this compassion?
What do you guys think?
Listen, Lear says, oh ho, are you there with me?
Carly says they can relate.
Yeah, no eyes in your head, nor no money in your purse. Are you there with me? Your eyes are in a heavy case, your purse in a light. Yet you see how this world goes. And Gloucester says, I see it feelingly.
Yeah,
I
get you.
Another double meaning, right? What, art mad? A man may see how this world goes with no eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Look with thine ears. See how yon justice rails upon yon simple thief. Hearken thine ear. Change places. And handy-dandy, which is the justice, which is the thief? Thou hast seen a farmer's dog bark at a beggar. Aye, sir. And the creature run from the cur. There thou mightest behold the great image of authority. A dog is obeyed in office. Thou rascal beetle, hold thy bloody hand. Why dost thou lash that whore? Strip thine own back. That is, beat yourself.
Beat yourself, yeah.
Thou hotly lustest to use her in that kind for which thou whipst her. The usurer hangs the cozener. Through tattered clothes small vices do appear. Robes and furred gowns hide all. Plate sin with gold, and the strong lance of justice hurtless breaks. Armed in rags of pygmy straw does pierce it. None does offend, none, I say none. I'll able him, that is, I'll exempt them from guilt. If thou wilt weep my fortunes, take my eyes. If thou wilt weep my fortunes, take my eyes. Look at this. He's coming to understand, isn't he? Because of all that he's suffered. Suffering has a way of kind of
stripping
hitting
away
home.
The pretense.
Yeah, stripping the pretense away and making us to know what's really true.
Yeah.
And in this interview, he says, I know thee well enough, thy name is Gloucester. Thou must be patient. We came crying hither. Thou knowest, the first time that we smell the air, we wail and cry. I will preach to thee. Mark. Alack, alack the day, Gloucester says. When we are born, we cry that we are come to this great stage of fools. This a good block. It were a delicate stratagem to shoe a troop of horses with felt. I'll put it in proof. And when I have stolen upon these sons-in-laws, then kill, 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 kill. I mean, he wants to kill his sons-in-laws. He's really mad, right? Okay, well, how does this whole encounter between the two of them end?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in right here, Mrs. A.
We need to zip on towards the end.
We're going to go ahead and move towards
concerned.
the end since we're getting that short on time. So let's go ahead and talk about the the climactic moment of the story.
Well, in order to get there, we have to just talk about the plot itself. In the midst of this, he runs off, and they to find him. And in the meanwhile, here comes Oswald, the dishonest servant, right? Who's, I think he's Regan's servant, and he's helping her in all of her aspirations to subvert her father's authority and to establish herself as queen and to put down even her sister, okay? And he comes with a letter that's very implicating. And that letter becomes very critical in the climactic moments of the story. Tell me about what's in that letter that Edgar and Gloucester intercept from Oswald.
Maya, your hand is up. Do you know about the letter? They intercept it from Oswald.
The letter
Go
from
ahead.
Oswald, actually, Oswald's Goneril's servant, so Goneril's
right.
plotting.
That's right.
So, what the letter that they intercept says that it's from Goneril to Edmund, and Goneril is saying, asking Edmund basically to kill her husband so she can marry Edmund.
Yeah. So we get to see this little love triangle.
And Albany is like and then Reagan also likes Edmund, and Reagan's and Cornwall died because the one servant killed him. So
Right.
Reagan's a widow, so she wants to marry Edmund. And Albany is the only good person in all of this. He's just kind of weak. He's been weak he can't stand up to Goneril. So until he finds the letter, he's not liking he's been going along with everything else that's been going on.
How does he, quote unquote, find the letter? How does he lay hands on this letter?
Edgar brings it to him.
Yes. Edgar, once he reads this letter, he reads, "Let our reciprocal vows be remembered. You have many opportunities to cut him off. If your will want not, time and place will be fruitfully offered. There's nothing done if you return the conqueror. Then I am the prisoner in his bed, my jail. Whose bed, her jail?" Whose bed is she talking about?
Her husband.
Her husband's dead. Yeah. She's conspiring against her own husband so that he'll be killed, so that she can marry Edmund, and the two of them can reign over Albion together. Okay, this is the plot.
And the two sisters are against each other as well.
Yes, because of this love triangle.
Because they like Edmund. Yeah, it's a love triangle. Right.
So he's not only played his father for a fool, he's playing the sisters for fools too, all in order through his wit to take control and to strike a blow for bastards.
Well, yeah,
right?
His plan is not to share the kingdom with Goneril or Regan or anybody. His plan is to be king all by himself.
Absolutely. It's a power play from first to last. Now, Edgar gets this. He sees what his brother's up to, and he says, now I know what I'm going to do. I see my way out here. I'm going to take this letter. I'm going to present it to Lord Albany, and I'm going to out my brother. And then I'm going to fight my brother like the champion and restore proper power in the kingdom. That's what I'm going to do. And we'll see how all this turns out. Now, in all of this, does he disclose this to his father?
For the sake of time, Missy, go ahead and tell us.
He doesn't. He doesn't tell his father. He's still uncertain as to how his father would respond. So he's still leading him as though he were poor Tom for all of this time. Meanwhile, Lear is caught, and he comes back to Cordelia. And there's this beautiful scene where he repents to her. Be your tears wet? Yes, Faith, I pray, weep not. If you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause. They have not. Ooh, his first admission that maybe he has wronged her.
Has wronged Cordelia.
And her response, no cause, no cause. Now, as we go on, he says to her, you must bear with me. Pray you now, forget and forgive. I am old and foolish. He repents to Cordelia, and her response, obviously, in all of her words towards him, is nothing but comfort. No cause. You've done nothing. You've done nothing. Be comforted. And she attends to him to give him what he needs. So we've got them back together. We've got Edgar with his father and in the know, right? And in the meanwhile, he's figured a way out. Now, when all of this goes down and they fight and Edmund falls, we get a little retrospective coming from Edgar, where he tells what happens with his father. The Duke of Albany says, "Where have you hid yourself? How have you known the miseries of your father? What's happened to your dad?" And Edgar says, "By nursing them, my lord. List a brief tale." And he tells his story. "And when 'tis told, oh, that my heart would burst. The bloody proclamation to escape that followed me so near. Oh, our lives' sweetness, that we, the pain of death, would hourly die rather than die at once, taught me to shift into a madman's rags, to assume a semblance that very dogs disdained. And in this habit met I, my father, with his bleeding rings," that is, his eyes
eye
put
sockets.
out, their precious stones new lost. "I became his guide, led him, begged for him, saved him from despair. Never, O fault, revealed myself unto him. I never told him who I was, until some half hour passed, that is a half hour ago, when I was armed. He was, even then, when he told him he was afraid his dad was going to try and kill him.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure, though hoping of this good success, I asked his blessing. And from first to last, I told him my pilgrimage. But his flawed heart, alack, too weak the conflict to support, twixt two extremes of passion, joy and grief, burst smilingly. What happens to Gloucester when his son reveals the truth to him?" Mr. A, what happens?
He dies of a mixture of joy and grief.
Yes, joy and grief. Joy and grief. He dies smilingly.
The pain, which is a little bit like release of knowing who you are and being loved anyway, is overwhelming.
Yeah, he has a heart attack and he dies.
So, Mrs. A, if I could...
Meanwhile, though, what happens with the others?
Or not.
No,
or
if
not.
you could summarize for us what happens with
Right
the
here.
others.
I'm up here.
Yeah. And over here. What happens with the others, Mr. A?
With who? With whom?
Well, what happens in this whole situation with Edmund and Cordelia and Regan and Goneril? How does the matter turn out?
The matter turns out... Somebody will have to remind me. How does the matter turn out?
Give me the action here, because there's a lot of action crammed into the last couple of scenes. What happens?
There is a plot on the part of Cordelia at the head of the French army to retake England, right? Sarah, your hand is up. Go ahead.
So they fight, and England and Edmund wins, and then Lear and Cordelia are captured, and Edmund tries to have them killed. And then Albany confronts Edmund about wanting to marry Goneril, and Edgar comes and they fight. He fights Edmund and wounds Edmund, and then you find out that Regan was poisoned by Goneril.
Yeah.
And that Goneril commits suicide.
Yes.
And then...
So you've got, basically, at this point in the play, you've got dead bodies littering the stage.
Yeah.
Right? People are dying everywhere.
Uh-huh.
And what about Edmund? What's his situation?
Sarah said that Edgar wounds him already.
Yeah, he's also got a mortal wound. He's dying. And how does this affect him?
I think I'm not sure how sorry he feels for what he does, but he tells them that he told someone to kill Lear and Cordelia, and he wants someone to try and save them.
Okay, well, they're all dying. Regan has already left the stage saying, "Lady, I'm not well, else I should answer," from a full flowing stomach. She leaves, she goes into the tent, she dies of poison. Meanwhile, Goneril takes her own life. And Albany's basically watching Edmund bleed out. He arrests him. There's my exchange. What in the world he is that names me traitor villain like he lies. Okay, they fight. And then afterwards, he speaks. And he tells them the situation. But he dies as well. So by the very end, we have, let's see, we've got on the stage Edmund, who's bleeding out. We've got Albany. We've got Edgar. And we've got Lear. Before all this goes down, Edmund has a chance to send a message by way of a servant saying that when Lear and Cordelia are secured in prison, that they should be executed post haste, which he fails to tell the Duke of Albany about. The Duke of Albany intends to pardon them and restore him because he's honest But before he can actually do this, it becomes clear that this is not going to happen, because here comes Lear, let out of the jail, carrying Cordelia. And what's happened?
She's been hanged.
She's been hanged. That's right. And Lear, we get to see a little bit of what he must have been like in his youth here. He says, "A plague upon you, murderers, traitors all! I might have saved her. Now she's gone forever. Cordelia, Cordelia, stay a little. What is it thou sayest?" Her voice was ever soft, gentle, and low, an excellent thing in woman. Going back to the beginning, right?
Yes.
"I killed the slave that was a hanging thee." So you can see him functioning in his vigor, the vigor of his youth here at the end, and functioning in his role as king, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is coming in between to protect those who are innocent. Anyway, he kills the guy that's hanging her, but too late. "Did I not, fellow? I've seen the day with my good biting falcon. I would have made them skip. I'm old now, and these same crosses spoil me. Who are you? Mine eyes are not the best, I'll tell you straight."
A final sight image.
Okay, and then in the last moments on the stage, you have him holding a mirror up to her mouth to see if maybe there's still breath coming out of her body. He's so concerned, he's pretty sure she's dead, but he doesn't want to believe it. Finally, he says this, "And my poor fool is hanged. No, no, no life. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all? Thou'lt come no more. Never, 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 never. Pray you undo this button. Thank you, sir. Do you see this? Look on her. Look, her lips. Look there. Look there." And then he dies. Edgar says, "He faints. My lord, my lord." And Kent says, "Break, heart. I pray thee, break." And Edgar says, "Look up, my lord." Why look up, my lord? Why is he telling Albany to look up?
To heaven.
To heaven, because Kent responds, "Vex not his ghost, oh, let him pass." So apparently there's the ghost of Lear rising on the stage up towards heaven.
Mm-hmm.
He hates him much that would upon the rack of this tough world stretch him out longer. He is gone indeed. And Kent says, "The wonder is he hath endured so long. He but usurped his life." He but usurped his life. This is Kent's take on the thing. That is, he's done this to himself. He killed himself.
Yeah.
"Bear them from hence. Our present business is general woe. Friends of my soul, you twain rule in this realm, and the gourd state sustain." And Kent says, "I have a journey, sir, shortly to go. My master calls me. I must not say no. My master calls me." That is, he's not going to live long either. Albany says, "The weight of this sad time we must obey. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long." Of course, on the surface, we'll never see the breadth of events that Lear has already seen.
Yes.
But meaning's much more than that. What does he
Yes.
mean by this parting shot? If this is the conclusion that's to redirect us to the actual thematic content of the story, the meaning underneath all this meaning, what does he mean by "we that are young shall never see so much nor live so long"? Essentially, Lear has seen the reality of life and circumstances. He has come to know himself. And what did he learn?
Well, the implication is that this is the most important.
This is the most important thing.
Kind of knowledge that there is. This is the most important kind of sight that there is.
Okay.
And that it comes with age or with experience. And so what he's suggesting is that absent experience, unless you're old, at least figuratively speaking, this kind of self-sight is
not available
to you.
Except from your elders, from the
Right.
lips of your elders. And what is it that his elder, the eldest there, has actually said most recently?
"Mine eyes are not the best, I tell you straight."
This is the height of sight. I don't see. Isn't that it? That confession of his lips. I don't see well. That's truth.
It's really kind of two things that Shakespeare is suggesting here at the end, that self-sight is the most important kind of knowledge, and that what you know when you have that kind of self-sight is your blindness.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing you learn as you become wise, as you see yourself clearly. you learn about your own ignorance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if this is the way the matter turns out, what is the climactic moment? You can actually argue a couple of places as being the climactic moment in the play. What do you think? Where are we going to place the climax? And what kind of themes result?
What do you guys think? It's fun to talk about this one. Given the fact that we've seen the warp and woof of the story, we've even made a lot of thematic observations. We kind of have an idea what Shakespeare is driving at. At what point does the action turn? Maya, you asked, do you have an idea? Benjamin says the sword fight between Edgar and Edmund. The sword fight between Edgar and Edmund sort of solves the political controversy in the play. Which political party is going to come out on top? Maya, is there a moment that solves the underlying conflict about self-sight?
Well, like the moment at the end does that, but at the same time, I think when Lear really does that also earlier on is when he reconciles with Cordelia.
Okay, now I want to just point something out that, honest to goodness, tell you a little story here. When I read this, a full-grown adult, realizing that this was a tragedy. Okay, what's a tragedy? Tragedy is a play in which... Go ahead.
Everyone dies.
Everybody dies. Things don't turn out well. It's tragic because the main character doesn't get what he wants. Right?
Yeah.
It's not a happily ever after. It's a tragedy, right? I'm reading this tragedy, and right up until the last moment, I'm thinking, oh no, Cordelia's going to make it. I know she is. It's all going to be okay. I mean, Mrs. A, it's a tragedy, right? So I was just horrified at the end. He led me along. Everyone dies. Of course, everyone dies. So is our climactic moment going to come at a place where Lear successfully gets what he wants? Or is it going to come at a point of no return? At which point he makes some sort of a decision that basically builds, that yields nothing but death and despair.
Well, I guess his point of no return is like in the storm, not willing to accept his responsibility.
Yeah,
I
that's what
think
I'd
so.
vote for.
Yeah.
I'd vote for that way madness lies. I'm not going to do that.
And then he does it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to look at it. And when he makes that decision and he's not going to look at it, that is the beginning of the end for Lear. That way madness lies. And look, if you place that there, if that's the fatal moment out there in the storm when he turns his face away and won't see himself, the result is he becomes crazier and crazier. And then finally, there is resolution with Cordelia, right? There's reconciliation. There's a semblance of sanity that returns to him. He begins to gain his senses again, little by little. And by the end, we see that he has actually come to see himself. But in the process, he's lost all of his children. He's lost his kingdom. And he loses his life. He even lost his fool, he says.
And so it's not that there isn't self-sight that comes to him. It's not that there isn't some measure of reconciliation. It's that all of those things are tragic because they come too late. They're too little too late. They're incomplete because of his essential refusal to see himself.
Now, what do you think Shakespeare's about in casting the story this way? Could he not have made it a better resolution? I mean, maybe Lear in the storm could have seen himself, and then he could have changed his behavior and owned his sin, and maybe things would have turned out differently, but that's not how he tells the story. Why? And look at the way that it does turn out. I mean, think about the mercy in the reconciliation scene with Cordelia.
Yeah.
Does he deserve that scene? No way.
No.
He doesn't deserve anything like a happy ending.
No.
He gets what he doesn't deserve.
Yeah.
What is that? There's a word for that. Getting what you don't deserve.
Getting what you don't deserve.
What is that?
Grace.
I think it's grace.
Yeah.
I think it's a grace. It may be that not only is this a story about our inability to see ourselves, our unwillingness to see ourselves, and the destruction that we wreak on ourselves and the people that we love, And if we're kings on the world, right? Not just our family, but also our nation, there are huge ramifications. Huge. But it's also about undeserved mercy, grace. It's about loyalty, the loyalty of Kent, the loyalty of Cordelia, the loyalty of Albany. It's about mercy. It's about love. It's about true filial kindness, duty. Very interesting. There are a lot more themes than the one that's just on the surface of things.
I also think that the themes that you've been discussing and we've just been listing here are, how do I want to put it? They're not the one that most summaries and treatments of King Lear focus on.
No, most of them want to focus on insanity.
Yeah. This is a play about insanity.
About a guy who loses his mind in his old age.
And that just seems to be
senility.
Just it's a trapping that the author has constructed in order to talk about these deeper things.
That's a very shallow treatment of the play.
I think so too.
I think the people who read it that way don't see much, just to use some sight imagery.
Yeah.
There's a lot more going on here. And if you just take some time to follow the little motif that Shakespeare's built into the play with eyes, just go back through, read it again. It doesn't take long. And notice every single time there's an allusion to eyes and sight. And trace the theme that he's developing right from the beginning all the way through to the end. This idea of, what is a man? A blind wretch, right?
And what does it mean to see?
What does it mean to see? Well, and what is the result of seeing? Well, think about that scene we looked at between Gloucester and Lear. What's the result of seeing? Is it not empathy?
Mm-hmm.
When we see our condition, we understand the condition of others better. Mm-hmm. We empathize with them. And it makes us merciful, kind, humble.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. It's beautiful.
One of the reasons we love to start with King Lear is to encourage you all to do the kind of reading that leads to seeing these deeper themes in the story. And I hope that you can see that questions about the setting, questions about the characters and their goals and the obstacles that they face, plotting the action on a chart like we've done today, noticing a climactic moment and how it relates to the underlying conflicts. Those are all techniques that we use all the time to uncover the author's themes. King Lear is dramatically thematic, and the books that we're going to be reading for the rest of the year are sometimes equally so. And so we hope that the techniques that we've been modeling for you today will help you in the next assignment.
Ryan's hand is up, Mr. A.
Okay, and then I'm going to have to cut the class after this because of time issues. But Ryan, you're self-muted. Go ahead. There you go. You're up, Ryan.
Oh, okay. So I just want a general observation about the play that I noticed is that in Shakespeare there are often a lot of allusions to mythology or to Greek and Roman gods, but there are also a lot more mentions of God himself in the Christian sense. And there are virtually none in this play.
It's a pre-Christian play. Remember, it's set in Albion, so it's with all of the gods, plural. And when Lear rages at the gods, it's plural. What do you make of that?
Kind of, I think, like another, underlying element of the play is a sort of showing that a sort of world without God scenario about how man is helpless without God's help, without like the grace, and that we already talked about that if you don't see the suffering and the stuff as having meaning in it, if you don't see that there is a higher cause or a higher power.
That you go crazy.
Yeah, that you go crazy. That you conceive yourself, you see yourself as just a plaything, a concatenation of atoms. Yeah.
Well, I think that's.
Go ahead, Ms. Ray.
I think that's true. There's a lot to be said for that. That maybe a good way to understand it would be that Shakespeare is discussing the human condition in this play, and that his interest is to talk about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a human being, with or without God, without reference to the existence of God. It's not that he's trying to be anti-Christian or non-religious or pagan. It's that the human condition is his concern. That might be a way to interpret what you notice in the play, Ryan.
Yeah, I don't think that it would be right to say that Shakespeare is making comments about the backwardness of materialism or something like that, because although there isn't an explicitly Christian God in the story, there is an acknowledgement of the gods and their business with men, and the perception of a higher power and matters working themselves out in particular ways. I don't see materialism as an underlying philosophy in this particular play.
Nevertheless, we encourage the kind of thinking that you guys are obviously doing, and we're excited about the year that's coming up. Thank you guys for your patience this time around with our technical difficulties. We hope that the electricity will be on next time around, and I'm going to be posting a recording of this class and the notes inside Google Classroom in the next 24 hours or so. In addition, I'll also be posting a discussion board question so that you can dive in and begin talking about the play amongst yourselves in the coming week. Remember, there'll be a discussion board post that goes up today, and that'll be due a week from today. We'll put another one up at that point, which will be due a week from then. So there'll be 2 discussions going on in the next 2 weeks, and then you can get started on the reading for next time. Thanks for coming, everyone. Great to have you. We're looking forward to the year. Until we meet again, happy reading.
Happy reading.